The Vigil, a horror thriller directed by Keith Thomas. This is his first feature-length debut, and apparently the film was shown to audiences back in 2019, where it initially gained success at the Toronto International Film Festival. Afterwards, Blumhouse was impressed by the film, and now it's beginning to slowly make the rounds. So The Vigil follows a young man named Yaakov, who is estranged from his Brooklyn-based Orthodox Jewish community. Needing rent money, he agrees to serve as a shumer, one who looks after a dead body for one of the deceased members of his former community. In doing so, Yaakov sets himself up for a terrifying night with a malevolent spirit. So I'm actually going to do a normal review for The Vigil, and then after I rate the film at the end, I'm going to go into a spoiler discussion about the aspects of the film that influenced my rating. Also, I would like to give Sean from Lost in the Reel a big shout out for bringing this film to my attention. I really appreciate that, man. And anybody who's been watching my channel for a while, you know that I love to discover hidden gem horror or thriller films. I love to come across them and discuss them and check them out if they have potential. And this sort of looked like it might be one of those films. So yeah, thanks for that, Sean. But let's talk about The Vigil. So there were a lot of cool aspects of this film that actually made it a really good horror film. So I actually felt like the first half of the film, kind of leading into halfway through the second act, had some really good top level horror and suspense elements. It was definitely the strongest in the first act though. The camera work was impressive as far as setting the tone with some nice continuous takes and cool slow panning around corners. This director was just on point earlier on at building tension in the film and projecting that ominous something's not right here type of vibe. And I would say they played their cards well in that category. They didn't take the generic route by introducing the first big scare with something running past the screen in the background or some crazy shit like that. Like, we get a real fucked up moment to dwell on for a bit, and that moment was fucking awesome. And from there, this is when the film starts to get into establishing character expositions, and this is where things always start to get a little tricky for me in these types of movies. So executing what's happening through either character explanation, old hidden journals, recordings, news articles, or some shit like that, and how to beat it is usually discovered in one of the ways previously mentioned, with some exceptions of course. In The Vigil, our main character Yaakov uses a combination of some of the things I mentioned to get to work on overcoming his supernatural challenge in the film. And in these different preparation stages up to the climax is where I began to have issues with the movie. Honestly, this film reminded me a lot of The Babadook, and I'm not going to get into the similarities right now because that would lead to a lot of spoilers, and I'm going to save the spoilers until later after the review. So if you want spoilers, you can stick around until then. But I think they did a pretty good job though at making the protagonist relatable to the viewers. And I actually felt myself giving a damn about his well-being because he's actually a pretty good character with a good heart. And the moral lessons that the film is trying to portray actually comes across really well with the lead's performance. There were a lot of things about this film that I really liked, especially with what they did as far as the originality with the horror elements, even if it was simply putting a spin on things that we've seen before. But I couldn't get past certain pacing issues when it came to the main character's mental obstacles and being able to overcome certain challenges so easily. I mean, challenges that were established by the film itself as seeming nearly impossible to overcome. And after the halfway point through the second act, this is where I kind of found myself beginning to lose interest. I mean, I still found the story itself to still be compelling, but this is where the horror and the thrill elements began to dwindle for me big time. And I just felt like it could have wrapped up stronger instead of fishing for a somewhat trendy, ambiguous ending. I don't know. I kind of have to speak in riddles at the moment to avoid spoilers because a film like this truly requires a deeper discussion, which is exactly what I'm about to get into. But I'm giving The Vigil a 7.5 out of 10. I like the film, but there's some debatable contradictions in my opinion that hurt the story to me. There's honestly a lot that has to take place in one night, and I think this limitation placed on the story rushed a lot of moments throughout the movie that could have worked more in the favor of the protagonist and possibly could have resulted in the outcome feeling more deserving in my opinion. But that concludes my review of The Vigil. Now I'm going to go ahead and get into my spoiler discussion, so that was your warning. So my major issue with the film was how the main character Yaakov essentially defeated the Mazik demon with what seemed to be very little effort. I mean, I'm not really sure if this is the case because of some of the ambiguous elements in the film, but from what I gathered, the film portrayed the final scene as though Yakov overcame years of trauma in just 5 hours, while also defeating a demon which I'm guessing has been around for thousands of centuries. But I'm not gonna go there because the film doesn't really go there as far as the demon lore is concerned. Also, another element of the film that just kind of had my mind wondering was Miss Litvak was able to offer so many helpful tips to Yakov about fighting the demon throughout the film, and I just kept wondering, did she ever offer any of these tips to her husband? You know, to help him out with his battles against the demon Mazik. I mean, I may have missed it if she ever mentioned trying to assist her husband in the same ways as she helped Yakov, but she ended up becoming the main reason why he was able to overcome basically everything. And also another thing that bothered me as far as Mr. Litvak's situation is concerned is that he seemed to be very knowledgeable about the demon, but somehow he still wasn't able to defeat him before his death. But a young man who shows up in one night and watches his old recordings and learns about the demon is able to overcome the demon in one night and free his soul from the grief he died with. And I want to use a Babadook example really quick because I felt like these movies were similar in the fact that they deal with grief as some form of like entity or demon or whatever, even if it's manifested by the person, the host, or whether it's just a demon that, you know, lurks in the night by itself. But in the Babadook, the main character dealt with grief for a while. And even by the end of the film, she still had to learn how to live with it. And I think they hammered in it really well how serious grief really is, and really establishing the notion of progress over time. I'm not saying I needed that in this film, but I wanted a clear indication that he was still healing, something that clearly expressed to the viewers that Yakov isn't completely safe. Now there's an ending scene that actually might be the answer to this, which looks like the demon is leaving the house and following him, or it could have just been one of the Jewish community members who came there the next morning to get the body and now they're leaving the house. I mean, they were all wearing black as well. I mean, who the fuck knows? But he takes one last look back at the house after he leaves, and the camera just lingers on the house, showing us a blurry dark silhouette possibly following him. Now him looking back at the house could have been a visual metaphor for him not quite being over his grief, but that also might be a stretch. Or it could have just been him smiling and brushing off that night and moving on with his life. I mean, there's a lot of ambiguity here. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but sometimes it's a lazy way to end a film. And I'm not saying that I thought the ending for this film was lazy, but what I am saying is that I can see how a viewer could perceive it to be that way. So personally, I think that I've barely scratched the surface as far as a spoiler discussion, and there's still more possible ideas to introduce, interpretations, hidden themes of the film that I didn't even touch on. So feel free to leave your comments down below and we can speculate on how deep the rabbit hole really goes. But there you have it for my spoiler discussion and review for The Vigil. If you enjoyed the content, you know what to do. Thank you for watching.